Hey everybody, today we have Mark Shead from ZD Corporation. He's the president of ZD Corporation, who is, they are in Midwest area and help a lot of companies do software development. Mark has been in software development for 20 plus years, and out of that, 10 years of it, he's been working as a coach, helping teams go agile, implement agile practices, and really be in the agile software development field. So we are really thankful, Mark, for coming to the show and answering some of the questions. First of all, let's just start out with a little bit more about you and what you've been up to.
So great to be here. I work with a lot of projects on, my company does software development, a lot of stuff for startups. And then the thing that takes most of my time is working on agile coaching for the opposite of startups, things in the government space and banking space and highly regulated industries. So that's kind of the gamut of what we do.
Nice. So you actually teach a lot of companies what is agile, how to do agile. So let's talk about what is not agile. What do you see, and how do you teach people not to do agile?
Well, I'm not called on very often to teach people how not to be agile, but I do get to experience what it looks like a lot. The biggest thing I see is since agile has become very much a buzzword for everybody wants to be doing it, it's really easy for people to say they're doing it without actually doing any of the stuff that it actually requires. There's a story we were working in New York and I needed to fly out of Kansas City, but we were going to be in Joplin, and I had some clothes that needed to be dry cleaned. And I live in a very small town, so there's no place here. So we were going to Joplin, then driving to Kansas City and flying to New York. And I saw that there was a 1-hour dry cleaner in Joplin. So I got my clothes and I was like, okay, if they can do it in an hour, I can drop it off when I get there, have my meeting, and then handle everything. So I called them up and said, okay, if I bring these clothes by at 9 o'clock, will they be done at 10? And they're like, yeah, they probably won't be done that soon. I was like, okay, what about 11? I can stretch things out to that. I'm like, no, it usually takes 2 days. So I was like, okay, who is this that I called? And their name was actually 1-hour dry cleaner. So I said, who is this that I called? And they said, oh, it's 1-hour dry cleaner, but that's our name. It's not what we do. That's just what we call ourselves. And I've seen a lot of agile teams that's what they do, right? It's like, we're an agile team. Why are you an agile team? Well, we're an agile team because we say we're an agile team. And that's not what makes you agile, right? Being agile is when you're actually following the principles and the values and saying, this is how we're making decisions. And it's very easy for teams it's a lot easier to say you're agile than actually be agile. And the same thing with TDD or a lot of other practices, right? The number of people that say they're doing TDD is very large. The number of people that are actually doing it is much smaller.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest things I see with teams that aren't doing agile is they get very focused on what they call themselves or what they call things. Like, we're going to have a daily stand-up. Okay, so the purpose of daily stand-up is to have the 15 minutes face-to-face communication. Well, I've seen teams that say they're doing that and say they're agile, but one team that I saw, what they actually did is they would all wait out in the hall or in the elevator or other places, call in, talk for 15 minutes, and then once the meeting was done, they would come in and put on their headphones and go heads down. And it was all designed to keep from having to have actual face-to-face communication with each other is what they were doing. But they were saying, oh, we're agile because we have this practice of doing a 15-minute meeting. Wow. And anyway, those are the types of things that I see teams doing. And it's like, if we go back and we actually look at what it means to be agile, we're doing all kinds of opposite of those things. So that's what it means not to be agile anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. Those are great examples. So, while let's say a client hires you and, they say, okay, you're an agile coach, and they bring you in. And if it's a very new agile team that's willing to learn new things. So what do you coach them? How do you train them? How do you get them up to speed to like be agile or start iterating on a product or delivering something?
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question. So usually what I'm doing when I come in and start working with a team, oftentimes they're looking for agile, but they're also looking, a lot of times I get brought in specifically when they're saying we see a need for doing more test-driven development or behavior-driven development and some of those things as well. Mm-hmm. So usually I'll come in with a team and start working with them first thing I do is I make sure that we all agree what the Agile principles and values are and talk through what that actually means for us. One thing I like doing is giving everybody cards with all 12 principles on them and say, okay, force rank these. What's the things that are easy to do here and you guys are doing great already on? What are the ones that are really hard? You know, put those at the bottom. Let's go through and talk through that. And it's amazing having that discussion because lots of people see different aspects of things. And so what's at top for one person is bottom for someone else, and what's bottom for someone else is top for, so it's just very interesting to see them having that conversation. So that's usually what I'll do is go through that process of really making sure that we all agree what the Agile principles are, because once we have that, we've got a shared foundation for making decisions, right? And then we can work through and decide what's good for this particular team.
Right.
And that's where I think a lot of things fail, is because we start with a bunch of practices. You know, hey, we saw a team doing this and they were successful. We saw a team doing this and they were successful. Well, that may be successful for them because they got to that point by making decisions according to Agile principles. And if you skip that step and try to just copy what somebody else is doing, maybe you'll get lucky and you'll get the results you're looking for, but that's not what Agile is about.
Yeah, you're looking at the winning lottery tickets number, but it's somebody else's.
Right. So usually when I'm coming in those situations, so I'll usually try to start with that with the team, but then also going with management, I usually do some training on leading it, how to lead Agile. And it's very simple things, but making sure that management is asking the right questions to encourage the behavior they want. Because if management is asking things that are counter to the principles, it's going to be hard. Then you've got team members that are like, you know, they're torn. The manager is asking me for this, but I'm trying to follow these principles. You've got to make sure those things are all aligned.
Right.
So those are kind of two sides I approach things. Like the first few days with the team is usually spent trying to make sure that we've got everybody on the same page from that perspective.
Yeah, and let's just talk about what does that look like when management or leadership hires you, but then they want you to do certain version of like Agile, or they have their own agenda on what they want you to do, because a lot of the audience are Scrum Masters or Agilist. They are actually often in that situation where they're hired, but they're kind of told or given a certain things to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to, and that's a tough situation, right? You're coming in, you're being asked to do something, you don't feel it fully aligns. And one thing I've found is if there's 100 things you could improve, and 10 of those are the things that the organization wants to improve, and you've actually got political backing for, start with those things, right? You know, there's no sense just doing the things that are hard that no one wants to do. Start with the things that you can actually make some progress and where there's agreement. And hopefully, as you work through those things, you'll be able to get to the point that you can get some traction and some better understanding of what it means to be Agile, so you can start incrementally doing maybe the things that the organization isn't as interested in changing or isn't as interested in implementing.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it's important. If somebody's bringing you in to work on something, say, hey, we want to be Agile and we want you to implement these 3 practices. Start with those practices, but make sure you build a foundation for why those practices, or for those practices actually following the Agile principles, and not just we're doing these practices for no reason, which may mean you sit down with everybody and go through the principles and say, what are the ones that are hard to follow, and lead the conversation to the point of, okay, we're having trouble following this principle. What if we take this practice? What if we try this practice that management is wanting you to do anyway? Let's try this practice and see if it helps us follow the principle better. Because if people are coming into something and they're just doing it because they're supposed to do it, but they're not actually basing it on any principles, they may be able to start saying they did the practice without actually getting the results from it. So like, for example, one thing that I think of is when teams are wanting to use TDD or BDD or a lot of those things, or DevOps, or all kinds of things.
Yeah.
If we go back and we say, okay, what's the principle that we think this will help us do? And for example, a lot of times is, can I deliver something? I want to be able to deliver something rapidly all the way through for the customer's competitive advantage. I want to be able to deliver something that gives the customer an advantage in the marketplace. And if I'm focused on, I'm doing this, I'm using TDD and I'm investing in TDD to follow this principle, or I'm investing in DevOps, then all my decisions around how I implement that are aligned with the principle I'm trying to follow and what I'm expecting to get out of it. If we just go and say, okay, like I've seen some teams or some organizations, they're like, oh, we need DevOps. So they spin up an entire separate department to do DevOps.
Right.
That's not related at all to the developers, and they're going to do DevOps, and it's just another silo that things are getting passed on to. And it's
Right.
not that they don't get any advantage from it, but since they didn't start from the idea of what principle are we trying to follow, they've created something that does not let them reach their full potential.
100%. No, that's nicely put. Yeah, you actually covered DevOps, BDD, TDD. So let's kind of talk a little bit more about these agile practices. And I know you do a great job of training on these. So let's just start with BDD. Kind of give us a little bit idea of what it is, how does the team actually use it, and what are the benefits?
Okay. So BDD, or behavior-driven development, is when we start with the idea that we want to express the requirements for the application in a way that we can make it executable, and that will always stay in sync with the application. So we end up writing things in Gherkin's a popular way to do it. Given whatever the situation is that you want to say is your starting point, given this, when this happens, or when this action is taken, then here's the result I expect. So given, when, then. And you formulate everything you want the application to do, or all your business rules, anything about it, in those types of statements. Then when the developer gets ready to work on it, you go and you make each of those statements executable. And it should fail, right? When you execute those, it shouldn't actually work, or your application already does what you're talking about. So you sit down with everybody at the beginning and specify very specifically, here's how the application would behave. Here's the behavior of the application in English with the given, when, then that we want in order to meet this particular goal, or take one step closer to what we're wanting to do. Developers take that, make it executable, and then start often using TDD, start developing until that scenario passes and that thing actually is there. And then you may have some reviews or stuff. But then every time you make a change to the application, you can run all your requirements against it to make sure it actually does what it's supposed to. Make sure the behavior of the application meets what the business owner actually asked you for in the beginning and what you know is valuable. And if you change something in one place that breaks something somewhere else, that scenario, the way that would the thing that when the user experienced it that they'd say was a bug, that will break, and you know it before you actually deploy it. And this is a very powerful way of writing applications because you're very focused. There's a couple advantages. One, it gives you a process for making sure you've got all the aspects of the requirements. So that's great. It also helps make sure that you're not gold plating stuff, because you're having this conversation with, usually you want somebody wearing a testing hat, somebody thinking like a tester, somebody that's a developer, and somebody that, the owner or the person that gets return on investment from the application being delivered. All of them sitting down and talking through this. So it's easier to figure out what parts not to build when you're actually having that conversation together. Because if you're a developer and I just write down everything I need and give it to you, some of those things may be really hard, some may be very, very easy. If we talk through it, you can say, wait, this thing you're asking for is really, really hard. And I may look at it and say, oh, I thought that was easy. It's not that big a deal. Let's not do that. Then this other thing you may say, this is really easy to do, and since I know what you're trying to accomplish, maybe I can even make it better by doing this or this other aspect, or maybe once we get this done, we should take this other step. And we can really be efficient in having those conversations. And then the other advantage of BDD is you have all these regression tests, right? Whenever you make a change, you can make sure you didn't break anything anywhere else. And I was working on a government project one time, and they had previously, the application we were replacing, it took them 6 months. When they made a change, it took 6 months before they could actually get that change through all the quality controls, all the testing and stuff, and deploy it. So there's a 6-month lag before things could be deployed. We started with BDD. I mean, very full gung-ho, everything was done as requirements. The business owners were there helping write them and stuff, and they ended up with thousands and thousands of BDD scenarios for this application. And what happened is after we went live, they were able to deploy, I mean, they'd invested in DevOps and things too, but they were able to deploy very rapidly. They could make a simple change to the system. This is highly, lots of regulation stuff around this. They could make a simple change to the system and actually have it deployed all the way through to production in 2 hours if they wanted. On average, they were deploying every week. That's just the pace that they had. There wasn't anything keeping them, and sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but like for the last 5 years, last time I checked with them, every week they've got new software going out. Well, there was one particular change in it that was very simple change, 2 lines. They needed to added, the business owner said, hey, we think this system will work better if we change these 2 lines. Changed the 2 lines, ran all the tests, and within a week, probably faster, but within a week, it was in production running. And I had been working with him, and after after that had been running for a while, I went back to him. I said, "What was that change actually worth? Can we actually pull some numbers from it?" So the business owner went through and they ran a few scripts and said, "Okay, it looks like that change actually gained us $200,000 a week."
Oh wow!
So just the investment of being able to get that out in a week versus it taking 6 months was worth $5 million. Plus all the value it would have after that. I mean, it continued having a return on investment, but just that investment we made up front in making sure that when we made a change, we could fully test it, make sure it didn't break any of our other business rules, that all the scenarios passed, was worth $5 million to them.
Wow.
And they've been deploying a new change every week. So if they can only find 1 or 2 changes like that per year, this software is paid for itself, paid for the rewrite many, many times over. So those are the types of advantages you can get by making that investment. It's a very hard thing to do. It required a huge amount of work, but the advantage of having that rapid deployment is there. And the thing that was really great about the team working on that is since they started with the Agile principles and started with the idea of we want to be able to deliver to the customer rapidly, and work in a way that's for the customer's competitive advantage, they were able to justify the investment up front because it would support their principles of being able to deliver rapidly to the customer like that.
Wow, that's a great story. A quick question that I had, let's say a team does start to do a BDD, like it's a practice around writing gherkins and really providing that context. So within Scrum, like what does that look like in terms of like people getting together to talk about these gherkin syntax? Like what does that look like from a cadence perspective?
So usually I've seen people try to do a lot of things. The thing I've seen that works the best is when we take a story and we're ready to work on it. It's in the to-do or ready to be worked on, not just assigned to the sprint, but we're ready to work on this. At that point, you get business, tester, developer together and you talk through, okay, what does this actually mean? What are the requirements? And that's where you actually create the gherkin or the scenarios. And there's a couple reasons for this, because I've seen a lot of people say, oh, well, we want to do it sooner. We want to do it in the previous sprint, or we're just going to have the business go and write them all. But the value of it isn't just that we have these things written. The value is going through the process of figuring out what those things need to be. And if we skip the process, we don't get the advantage of it. So you have to make sure that your cycle is designed to be short enough and that people have enough flex and flexibility and enough slack in their work schedule that when the developer's ready to work on something, everybody can converge and work on it. A lot of times what I've seen is at the daily stand-up, somebody says, hey, I finished these things yesterday. I'm going to be ready for a new story. And so at the daily stand-up, people say, okay, what story? They talk, say, what should we work on next? Okay, here's what we're going to work on next. These people that need to be involved, stick around after the stand-up and we'll write the scenario. And that's a very rapid thing. Or, if you're in the middle of the day and you've got something to work on, just pull people in. But you don't want that impeding your work. It's got to be part of the process.
Nice. That's great. And then we also talked a little bit about DevOps. So for the audience that's new to DevOps or trying to learn about DevOps, how would you teach them? What is DevOps? How to do it? How to understand it?
So I would think of DevOps of taking all the things we've learned about software development and all the things we've learned about agile deployment and recognizing that the new state of the world, we can treat infrastructure the same way that we treat code. And if you're deploying stuff to the cloud, everything that you define about the cloud can actually be done in code. And if that's true, and it is, and you can leverage that and all the stuff of being able to rapidly deploy code through, you can actually do with infrastructure as well. I've been on government projects where it's like, we need a server, and you hopefully will get that server in 9 months, huge amount of time before you get to try it. In the cloud, it can be, I wrote 3 lines of code and I can deploy it, and I have that server and I can tear it down any time I want as well. So it's a very big investment, but if you're following principles that say doing things rapidly is beneficial to the client, it's a very, you can have a lot of return on investment from it. I've been on teams that, and this was actually for the government, the place that took 9 months to get the server, that was for the server because they were deploying to production. But in their development stuff, they had scripted everything out, and they could stand up a complete development environment if they needed in, I think it took about 3 minutes to stand everything up. And they did it every day. Every day it would tear itself down at the end of the day. If they needed a new one, they'd stand it up the next day to have it there. In that particular case, what they had done is they had all their all the stuff happening in the cloud to test everything out, and then by the time they handed it off to run on-prem, it had been very, very well tested. But not just the code was tested, but all the configurations that needed to happen. Like if there was a change to the way that the web server was configured, that was done using DevOps, and it was represented as code. So by the time something was ready to deploy to production, it was very, very well tested. And one of the reasons that they could deploy so rapidly through in 2 hours, even if they needed to, was because by the time it got over to the production side of things, where it wasn't necessarily just the team touching it, there were very few things that could go wrong because it had been so well tested, because all the infrastructure changes, other than the physical servers, were actually represented as code and tested in the cloud environment.
Thank you. Thanks for that explanation. So now I just want to kind of pick your brain about testing and quality. So when you think about testing and maybe teach more of agile testing practices, like how do you go about teaching or coaching a team about agile testing and quality practices?
Okay, so a lot of teams I find kind of see QA as something that happens after you've created all the software.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that, like if we chart out everything that needs to happen, and we're going to do QA after we test the software, I mean, sometimes even just in other sprints, like software say that they're done with stuff, or developers say we're done with something, and later somebody will test it. If you take that approach and you consider yourself done with the software before it's been fully tested, you have lots of hidden work. As a matter of fact, I've seen some teams that are making negative progress because they're opening more bugs than the stuff they're actually completing. Big project I know that spent huge amount of money on stuff and got into that situation. And I was like 5 years ago, I was kind of talking to the people that were working on the project and say, here's what you're going to run into if you keep doing this. Here's some suggestions, and you don't need me to do these suggestions. These are really simple. You can do them yourself. And I just heard the other day they had completely canceled the project. And this was a very, very well-known high-level consulting group, but that's the problem they got themselves into. And so they're starting it up with another group now. But the problem was the testing was something that happened after the fact. It wasn't part of the definition of done. And since it wasn't part of the definition of done, there was all this hidden stuff in there, and to the point that they were creating more work than they were actually finishing, which is not the situation you want to be in at all. And by the time those bugs came back all the way over, and those bugs were fixed, they created new bugs. So when it was tested again, new bugs went into the system. And it's a nightmare, but it's something that's very easy to happen in those situations. So you have to see your definition of done as meaning that this software is actually finished all the way. If the software is not finished all the way, you can't say you're done. You need to make sure that you've still got all the bandwidth and the developers fully dedicated to getting it done. So that's where TDD and a lot of automated testing comes in, is because if I can actually take most of that QA stuff and put it at the beginning of the process to where I'm writing my tests and everything at the beginning or as I develop it, when I get to the end, I've now got a much higher confidence that this is done. It also means that I can probably have QA people doing manual testing if I need that as part of the process, because there's not as much they're needing to test. And I usually like to think of it So I work on a lot of teams that have QA people involved in it. There are QA people. I'm down on some teams that are like, they've matured to the point and their BDD and TDD tests are so mature, they don't really have anybody doing QA. I mean, the business owners are going in and checking things out before it goes live,
Oh,
but
wow.
there's nobody assigned to the QA role. So I usually like to tell QA, if we're using BDD and TDD and using it correctly, we're shifting what QA is trying to do. And instead of QAing the software, they're QAing our process of writing tests for the software.
Nice.
So what they're checking is making sure, are there any tests that we should have written that we didn't write? Because we want to feed that back in to make sure that next time we write some tests, we don't have any blind spots in it. And they're doing almost the same thing, but it's a subtle difference in how you approach your job. Of being QA is there to change the way that the process works. If you think of it like a factory, somebody at the end of a factory line, and you've got these cars coming out at the end, somebody who sees their QA's job is to point out the cars that there's something wrong with it. Okay, that has value. They don't go out and stuff. However, somebody that sees their job as QA to help figure out how to improve the factory so those cars don't come out in the first place, they're going to
Right.
be doing the same type of inspection, but it's a different mindset, and it has tremendously more value because then we're not just finding problems, we're using that to actually fix the root of the problems, not just saying, okay, well, this is broken.
Yeah, no, that's super important. That's a much more proactive approach. And I've been in an organization where QAs are, one of the metrics that the QA manager is tracking is the amount of bugs. So they're not even incentivized to like think about how do I proactively help them. They want to just like find those bugs, and obviously that's how they are rewarded. So
Right.
that's a great point that you made.
Well, and one of the things I encourage QA people to do when they are checking things is the first thing they do shouldn't be to file a bug. First thing they should do is talk to the developer and say, hey, I'm seeing this. Does this sound right? Are you seeing something different? Maybe we're not actually seeing the bug, we're seeing the symptom of another bug somewhere. Or maybe there's just a misunderstanding about what this thing's supposed to do. So have that conversation, and if possible, maybe we can just fix it as part of that cycle. Which, if you're getting your bonuses based on how many bugs you file, that completely messes up all your bonus structure, right?
Yes, yes. And obviously, taking that bug and having a conversation, that is the first principle of Agile, individuals and interaction. So yeah, so I kind of bringing them back to the values. So let's talk about just the product ownership. I want to hear, what does good product ownership look like? Or, if you've had experience working with a great product owner.
Okay. No, that's good. That's a good question. And I hear a lot of confusion around kind of the product owner role. And different organizations have to approach it very differently, right? There's some organizations where I've worked on some government stuff where like the people that actually benefit from the software for whatever reason are somewhere else and removed, and maybe don't even understand what the software does. They just get the benefit. So there's somebody else that's kind of a proxy for them. So those types of situations happen. The most effective product owners I've ever worked with, though, were the people that worked with the software on a day-to-day basis, but their focus was, in addition to working with the software, being there for the team to help answer any questions, explain what needs to be done, and guide what gets worked on next. And I've been on teams where the product owner was, one team I'm thinking of, a distributed team. We had people in San Francisco, Birmingham, DC. I was working remote in Kansas. We had some people in Michigan, Philadelphia. So all spread out. They were online 8 hours a day on video, just like we are here. So in the team rooms where people were in team rooms, big screens up on it, all on video conference 8 hours a day, including the product owners. So the product owners were in their team room working, but they were always available both audibly and visually if there was ever a question about something. So during the day when they weren't needed, they were actually using the software to do other types, to do the work that they would do. But if there was ever a question, they were right there because their priority was to help the team. But they needed to work with software to make sure they understood everything about it, and that was their main job. But they were dedicated to the team in that level. So when on the stand-ups, they were there. If a developer ever had a question, it was like being in the same room, except for they happened to be geographically distributed, but they were on video conference with them all the time. Those product owners were incredible. They understood the software inside and out, and they were since they were so embedded, since they were so much just part of the team, they were able to be very efficient in what got done and what didn't. So they could make decisions, and the developer would say, you know, this is kind of hard. It was all conversations, right? What you ask for is kind of hard. This other thing I think gives you what you're looking for, but is really, really easy. And they could say, oh yeah, that's perfect. Let's go and do that. Or no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. We've got to do it the hard way. So product owners that are really, really engaged, know the software in and out because they use it, but are there for the team just constantly and see themselves as part of the team. Those are the most effective product owners I've worked with. And so that's the model I try to, can't always do it, but that's the model I'm trying to always encourage people to move toward.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you for that. And the last thing that I want to ask you is like, how has it been suddenly working remotely? And you brought up remote work. So wanted to hear what's working, what's not working. What are some best practices that you've realized in working remotely?
So those are very timely questions. For me, it wasn't as big a shift because I've been working with teams since about 2000, mostly remote all the time. I've got stuff I do on site, but I've had that. So my way of working has often developed around that. What I found is the teams I have worked with that have been successful are trying to replicate a team room. They're always on video all the time. And a lot of people are not doing that today. And I think for some of them may be working fine, but they're probably missing out on a lot of opportunities to really have good face-to-face communication and replicate that. My experience has been when you get to the point that people are having just side conversations over video and commenting on the weather they see outside the window at another one of the locations, those are good signs that you're actually that the technology isn't in the way anymore. So for teams that are trying to actually have really, really good collaboration, I encourage people to get some time, make the investment in being able to be up on video all the time. Some of the things I found that work really well is not doing it on the computer that you're working on. So like, for example, here, I've got a Cisco video conferencing, like a standards-based video conferencing system. It works with WebEx, but it will also call in anything else. And that's a TV on a cart. And this is in my home office. A TV on a cart, it's separate. If I need to share stuff through it, I plug in an HDMI cable and share through it, which means my computer's not trying to do all the encoding. If I need to reboot my computer, I don't lose my ability to talk to people. It kind of separates those, and it keeps me from trying to deal with one monitor. I've got all the people I'm talking to are over there, and the computer I'm working with is over here. So that's been very effective for me, and the cost of it is the cost of a lot of these things have come down tremendously. And even if other times when I didn't have that equipment, just having a separate computer that I use for my video conferencing made a huge difference in my ability to kind of work on one, but have this other place that's just a view into a room where all my coworkers are.
Yeah.
Another thing with working from home is I've had getting a good mic. Like I've got a earpiece here I use. I don't know if you can hear it. There's a rooster that likes to perch right outside my door, and he likes to crow a lot. So this helps minimize that, so it's not quite as distracting. And a lot of people are working from home, and they've got kids at home too. So the ability to hit a button and mute for a while can make it a lot more comfortable if something's going on in the house that's bringing up a lot of noise. Also, not pointing your camera at the common part of your house. I was working with somebody that was remote one time, and somebody walked across behind him wearing a towel, and I was like, yeah, he might want to actually face the camera another way.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's lots of things related to working from home, and there's another thing I found is trying to make sure you've got enough light. That people can see you, getting good audio. You just have to take some time to invest in trying to make sure it's as smooth as possible. But the big thing I found for teams is, and the idea of being on video all the time, every day, freaks people out. First time I did it, it freaked me out for about a week. You do get used to it, and the benefits are very, very, there's great benefits to it. Matter of fact, I've worked with people that worked on a team. I've talked to people who worked on a team like that for 5 years and then left and went somewhere else. And they were telling me I would do anything to get back to working on a team like that. Now, the team was very productive, which is part of it, but that online constant communication with a bunch of people that were really, really focused on getting work done and not being disconnected was just very important to just the way they felt about stuff. So those are some things I've found that have been useful. And the always on communication, I think, is something that's very underutilized, because you can always turn it down. And that's something I think people are like, well, I couldn't hear people talking all the time. Well, if people are talking and I'm in an office with them, I tune them out. Here, I can actually turn the volume down, and then somebody will ping me on, instant messaging and say, hey, you may want to be in on this conversation. But you're all there, and you can see the person. Like, are they heads down working on something? Do they look happy? If they look angry, maybe I shouldn't bring up this up to them right now and stuff. So,
Right. Yeah, and for me, those are great tips. So for me, I'm just staying adaptable, and just to kind of wrap up everything, 2020 had great plans, a lot of plans, but with the pandemic, really trying to adapt a lot of plans. I'm pretty sure same thing with you too. So with that, that's a wrap. Mark, thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. We will sure to come back with more exciting videos on Agile topics.